So I make these every couple of months, a batch of probably 10 pounds or so of beef lung or beef heart, but generally beef lung because it dries very well. It's very low in fat. But if you're a bit squeamish about using lung, as you can see here, or heart, you can always buy an inside or outside round roast, not too expensive, and just cut it in strips, and I'll show you basically the process for that using these. So again, in this video I'm going to show you beef lung and beef heart, but you can certainly use other meats. The good thing about beef lung, it's very high in protein and low in fat, so it's perfect for dehydrating or put in the oven at low temperature. Same with beef heart, very high in protein as well. So I'll run through the steps of this type of meat, but again, you can use a roast. So here we go with a sliced beef lung. These are about 1/2 inch sliced slabs that my butcher, the store that I go to, does for me on special order. So not that easy to find, but if you can find them, they're the perfect meat really for doing this type of dog chew or treat. Okay, so that's what they look like. You can see the cartilage there has no fat in it. These are partially frozen, so they're fairly easy to cut. I would suggest when you're cutting any meat for dehydrating or in the oven, you want to have it partially frozen so it's stiff and it's a lot easier to cut. Once they start defrosting, they get kind of soft and a little bit unmanageable when it comes to handling and slicing. So these are still fairly stiff. You can see the lung is also in segments, so sometimes it breaks away into smaller pieces, which is no big deal, because oftentimes these strips, when they dry, I break them up into smaller pieces for little individual treats or for training, and then we leave some that are long for chews. Okay, so go through the same step for any type of meat. Basically, you want to cut them in strips and not too thick. And remember, you're going to be drying these in the dehydrator or oven, so the thicker it is, the longer it's going to take. So you want to do the reason these are fairly thick is because they're full of air pockets. So lung is like that in terms of its makeup. So it does dry a lot faster than other meats because of the air pockets that are inherently inside of them. So lay them out. Make sure you space them with some air spaces in between. If you stack them too closely or touching, then they'll stick together and they won't dry as fast. Okay, so don't overdo it when you're spacing your trays out with the strips. And here and there you're going to have to kind of recut certain sections. So lung is very high in protein and iron. It's also good for puppies up to older dogs because it's very easy to digest. And obviously making it yourself, there's no additives, there's no preservatives, so you know what you're getting. And as long as there's no fat, you can store them outside of the fridge or freezer. You can just put them in a container and take them when you need them. So there, I've filled all my trays up. So my highest temperature on my dehydrator is 175 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to set that for 12 hours as my standard, and then after 12 hours I see how it's doing. So, but oftentimes I'll go a little bit longer if I find they're not quite dry enough. You want to make sure that any meat you're doing is completely dry and cooked. You don't want it with any raw bits left over in the strips. So just be aware of that and make sure that if you need to add some more time, you do that, because you're going to be storing these outside the fridge. So this is just after a few hours, and you can see they're still not far along the way in that dehydrating process. Okay, and here there's 2.5 hours left in that 12 hours, and you can see they're starting to get pretty dry and stiff. And as they dry, they'll often curl. You can see there's a bit of a bend to them, so that sometimes when you're pulling out the trays, it's a little bit hard to get out because they've kind of curled up a bit. But you're looking basically for an end result of a nice crispy and dry meat. So here you can see I'm tapping it to make sure it's nice and dry. I'm pressing it down to make sure there's no gooey parts inside. So nice dry meat for storage. Again, 175 is as high as mine goes, and you can do this in the oven as long as you, again, space everything out. So there you can see If you happen to see any little pieces of fat, set them aside or trim them off, because you don't want this to go rancid. I mean, I don't usually store them that long anyway, but any remaining fat you want to make sure that's gone, and you can feed it to the dog right away or just discard it. But here's the heart. Now the heart inherently has more fat, especially along the top side of the heart, so you're going to have to trim that off. And then along the sides too, on the outer side is a bit of fat. So it just takes a bit of trimming. I don't do heart that often because of this. It's a little bit more of a pain in the you know what. So because it's a little bit hard to cut, but it's very, very high in protein, and it's great for the dog, and they enjoy the taste. So sometimes it's worth it to go through this extra trimming stage. Now again, even after you've dried it, you're still going to see little bits of fat that you can trim off. So, but do most of it now before you do the drying. So I just cut the heart in 2 halves, basically, just to make it easier and more manageable for cutting. I take off any other little pieces of fat, and then I use a larger knife. And same with the lung, I try to get them in fairly thin slices. This was completely thawed, so it's a little bit harder to cut. I would have preferred it to be partially frozen. I could have put it in the freezer for a couple hours and then did the slicing. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit easier to do. But you can see there again, there's very little fat in this meat, so that's important in your selection for this kind of treat for the dogs, is that you find a meat with very little fat on it and mostly protein. So both the lung and the heart are pretty much in the 80 to 85% protein, which is what you want to look for. Okay, so these aren't as uniform in terms of slices, but just lay them out. Again, leave spaces in between for the air to flow. The other good thing about heart, it's high in B complex vitamins, so folate, iron, zinc, selenium, all those things that are good for prevention of heart disease. So really good for the dog. Now you're just feeding them as a treat. This is not their main meal, right? So we're going to set the dehydrator to 12 hours again, and at 175 degrees Fahrenheit. I find the dehydrator a lot easier to manage than doing it in the oven, because everyone's oven's a little bit different, but this is pretty consistent and a lot easier to use the trays. Also in the oven, you kind of either have to use wire racks, or if you lay it flat on a surface, sometimes it doesn't dry as well, so, or you have to rotate them part way through. So yeah, I would invest in a dehydrator. They're not very expensive, and you're going to be using it for years too, and it's a good treat for your dog. So there you can see the end result of after about 14 hours. So after 12, I found that it was still not completely dry, and then you can see pieces of fat that I was talking about earlier that you're going to have to trim off and just discard them. But again, you don't want any pieces of fat still on your strips, because if you're going to store this outside the fridge, they could go rancid on you. But again, it depends how long you're storing these for. So here you can see the beef lung strips. They're nice and dry, and I just break them into bite-sized pieces. And the remainder I leave in just longer strips for like dog chews. So great for training, great for treats. And she certainly loves the taste. She's always comes running when she sees that we have them. So I encourage you to try this out. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Bye for now.